Almando Calvo sent me some questions about my atheism for reasons that will remain unspecified, and my answers ended up not being short. That wasn't helped by the fact that I reached out to you, the audience, for input on things that I should mention that I might not have thought of. You had a lot of good ideas that I think were important to bring up, which is why they're here, but they don't help with the length problem. I don't know if the full form of these answers will be used for anything. I kinda doubt it. I think I'm gonna cut them down severely, like to 1/10 of the size, but I might as well make videos to at least get something out of all the work. I will, of course, send them to Almando. I hope he either reads them or listens to the videos, because, in my opinion, the questions I received are good. They seem to reflect a massive leap in open-mindedness and willingness to at least hear out the other side. The fact that these are just 10 straightforward, honest, open-ended questions makes them worthy of respect, and so I feel that they deserve a serious answer, and I put real effort into trying to give them one. Now, Almando was very clear that these questions are specifically about me, and so while I do speak generally about atheism and other positions, I do that with the intent of clarifying my own positions. And just as these questions are for me specifically, I wrote this for him specifically. Almando Calvo wants to be a powerful opponent to atheists. He wants his ministry to change hearts and minds. And in a strange way, I want to see that happen too. But that's hard to do when you misunderstand the current state of those hearts and minds to the point of complete misrepresentation. Which, with all due respect, Almando, if you're listening, is what we were seeing previously. That's part of why people were so incredibly unreceptive. Now, I know that you're not going to agree with my positions as I've laid them out here. I know you're not going to deconvert. I know you're going to stay a Christian. I know you're going to keep trying with your ministry, writing books, making videos, whatever it is you want to do. Nothing I say here is intended to convince, only to explain. We're going to remain opponents on topics like theism and religion and so on, but what I hope is that by at least understanding my outlook, and atheism and certain non-theistic ideas generally, you can move closer to the goal of turning some of my atheist buddies into Christians. It can be done, but first you gotta know what you're dealing with. It's a lot easier to fight a battle if you know where the enemy is. Now, audience, this is not necessarily the final version, so if you have suggestions for improvements or other things I should mention, leave those in the comments. Even minor suggestions about style and so on are appreciated. I'm not much of a writer, because if I write it all these days, it's for videos, and I aim for a style that's going to sound more like the casual tone of my speech. Here I tried to keep some of that conversational tone, but I did pretty it up a little bit. So it's kind of half and half of like formal-ish writing style and video style. And I feel like in the second half it's a bit more like video style. I was getting tired. Well, question 1 is, what experiences do you have with religion? And you know, it feels weirdly awkward to just read a script when I'm not responding to anything. But I guess I'm just gonna have to suck it up and get used to it. I've been an atheist video creator since late 2011, so I have a lot of exposure to religion. But that type of exposure is not always what people mean when they ask this question. Often they're more interested in something more personal. On the island off the west coast of Canada, where I grew up, religion didn't seem to concern most of the people I knew. This apparent general disinterest with religion couldn't have been universal since there were churches, which somebody obviously used. But I don't remember hearing anyone talking about actually visiting one on Sundays, and I never visited one for a religious purpose. The first time I entered one was when the one in my small town hosted a local art exhibition. I was fairly young, and I didn't think much of it beyond wondering what the building was for when not full of paintings. I believe I later visited a church for a wedding. And I'm going to pause here for a second to tell the audience that when I write a script for a video, which is not really that common, but when I do, I don't really stick to the script. I ad-lib a lot, I kind of loosen up the language, but I don't want to do that here. I want to stick pretty closely to what I've written, but I keep going off script automatically. This is tricky, man. Well, I'll do my best. Religion was mostly a non-issue in my circle of family and friends. It was neither promoted nor disparaged. The only time I remember it coming up was when one of my rarely seen peripheral friends told me he was going to his confirmation soon, as though I would understand his meaning and have something to say about it. I didn't. In high school, the reality of religion still barely intruded at the edges of my awareness. I had a casual friend who was something called a Jehovah's Witness, who would turn down participation in various activities with the assertion, "It's against my religion." I thought it was some sort of joke, and I started using it myself until I noticed that it caused confusion and wasn't all that funny anyway. Someone I'd met in a chat room suddenly became upset with me over something I'd said and went on a prolonged rant about the odds of life originating randomly, which apparently were 1 in 10 raised to some huge power, then blocked me before I could reply. And shortly after I started grade 10, the events of September 11th, 2001 informed me there was a type of person called a Muslim, and that some of these people were mad at America about something. In the years that followed high school, supernatural ideas, including various Christian and Muslim ones, as well as New Age ones and others, would find their way to me from time to time, but as fragments with no context, sporadic curiosities. I slowly became aware that it's against my religion is not just a humorous way to turn down participation, and religion is something that people take seriously. I found it a bit odd, but I had no deeper interest in it. It didn't catch my attention until around 2011, when at age 23 I discovered young Earth creationism on YouTube, and experienced a serious shock. The ideas seemed absurd, and yet were passionately defended using reasoning that seemed more emotionally motivated than aimed at finding knowledge, to put it kindly. I'd heard of other beliefs which I considered to be silly, but they were never pursued and promoted with such obsessive dedication, or such a large stock of faulty arguments. The irritating novelty finally earned religion my full attention, and made me want to learn more. Over the next several months, I spent a lot of my free time watching videos of debates between the religious and non-religious, which usually focused on Christianity due to its prominence in the English-speaking world. As I improved my understanding of both sides' arguments, I began critiquing them mentally, picking out flaws in the arguments of atheists and theists alike, pausing videos so I could argue back out loud. In other words, I started doing what I do now, just without a microphone. I noticed that most of the atheists on YouTube at that time had been raised Christian, or at least had been exposed to Christianity in a significant way in their youth, which meant that although my outsider perspective was not unique, it was less than usual. Eventually I realized I should buy a microphone. Before this time, I hadn't had much experience with making arguments, and I quickly found that the process was not only intellectually stimulating, but entertaining as well, which is what would sustain my interest in later years after the novelty of the ideas had somewhat faded. It's often assumed by Christians that atheists must have been hurt by religion or the church or individual Christians. But for me, as for many, this is not the case. I don't have an emotional grudge against religion. I just find religious ideas and arguments inadequate. Even after so many years, I'm baffled that Christians think their claims about reality are believable based on the evidence they present. My only interest in religion is based on that basic concern for truth. I've noticed that Christians often misunderstand what atheism is, and by extension, what my own position is. If this were rare, I wouldn't bother to address it, but unfortunately it's anything but rare. As such, I would like to clarify both atheism and my positions generally to increase understanding. An atheist is a person who does not believe in any gods, and who may believe that there are no gods. While in some philosophical discussions the term might be used only to refer to those who believe there are no gods, in everyday usage it more commonly includes everyone who does not believe in gods. These two very different definitions are then usually distinguished from each other with pairs of terms like weak and strong, soft and hard, or negative and positive atheism. The word atheist comes from Greek, combining theos, meaning God, with the prefix a, meaning without. Thus, without God. This prefix is not related to the English word a, meaning one, so atheist differs significantly in meaning from atheist. Atheists often encounter an expectation from the religious that atheism should offer answers like those of religion, but this is what's known as a category error, assigning properties inappropriately to a type of thing to which they cannot meaningfully apply. Atheism is not a religion, a worldview, or a belief system of any kind, all of which require multiple beliefs as opposed to atheism's 1 or 0 beliefs. Atheism cannot, and is not intended to, replace Christianity or any other worldview, and it does not attempt to answer the questions that Christianity claims to answer. It does not provide a moral system, purpose, or meaning, nor does it provide explanations of origins or of any other aspect of reality. It provides no emotional consolation regarding death, fear, suffering, or loneliness. It proposes no vision of the future. None of this indicates that atheism lacks something it should have. Atheism simply is not the type of thing that does any of that. To expect that it should provide these things is like expecting that your non-belief that 2 and 2 make 5 should tell you how to live your life, or alleviate your fear of death. Atheists, as people, do seek and find answers to questions about morality, meaning, origins, and so on, but none of these questions is the one addressed by atheism itself. Atheism is an answer to a single question. Are there any gods? An answer of, I don't think so, or I think not, makes one an atheist, and all other questions remain wide open. This means atheists are not actually a coherent group with a consistent set of beliefs. While the history of the internet and advocacy around the term atheist have resulted in those who self-identify as atheists on YouTube being, on average, more of the science and logic variety, this obscures the reality of a very broad spectrum of thought. You will find religious atheists, and atheists with any given non-theistic position on morality, purpose, science, the nature of reality, and so on. Likewise, atheism does not come with political restrictions or preferences. Atheism does not promote communism, fascism, liberalism, conservatism, anarchism, or any other political viewpoint or policy. And you will find atheists of all political stripes, including, amusingly, theocratic atheists. I've met them. Because atheists live in the same societies as the religious, until the topic of God comes up, it can be difficult to tell atheists apart from religious people. In most aspects of day-to-day life, and in the broad strokes of beliefs about life and society, atheists and Christians share many of the same values and concerns. I'm unusual in that I spend significant amounts of time discussing atheism. Most atheists are not that interested. Even I don't tend to bring it up in my offline life, just because most of the time it's not that important. I'm not some zealous defender of the unfaith who needs everyone around me to agree. It's been my experience that Christians have trouble understanding the mindset of people like me in areas of thought addressed by their religion. This is understandable, and the feeling is mutual. In some ways, we're like aliens from separate planets trying to communicate with each other, and often failing. Despite the many cultural similarities I share with you, some aspects of how we interpret reality are fundamentally different. While atheism is not my worldview, I do, like everybody, have one, which has some profound differences from the Christian one, which create unexpectedly deep chasms of separation that go far beyond mere disagreement on a few claims or stories. As understandable as it is, it can be frustrating to be repeatedly informed of what I really think, which seldom reflects what I really think. As such, I would like to clarify several things about me which Christians often misunderstand. I genuinely do not believe in God, or the claims of Christianity that depend on God's existence. I see Christianity the same way Christians see religions they don't follow, or any other idea they disagree with. While Christians don't find my reasoning valid, or at least assume they don't if they haven't watched my videos, it is reasoning, nevertheless, and the position I claim to hold as its product is in fact the position I hold. All too often, discussions are derailed by accusations that atheists are falsely claiming to hold our positions, when it's not at least granted that an opponent is in fact an opponent. Further discussion is a waste of time. I don't hate God. Hating God requires belief in God, which I do not have. The descriptions of God by its followers lead me to think it would be a disturbing figure if it existed, but I have no substantial emotional response to it because I consider it fictional. Any responses I have are solely to the believers. I don't hate religious people. I now live in conservative small-town Alberta, the Texas of Canada, among many religious people I like and respect. I criticize the arguments of religious people only when they choose to present those arguments publicly or to me personally, in the spirit of truth and the fun of the debate. I think religious people are sincerely misled, but that's a normal part of the human experience. Intellectual opposition is useful, but enmity rarely is. I'm not resisting belief. That's what people do when they're mostly convinced but don't want to accept that fact for some emotional reason. Sometimes believers expect me to be as emotionally invested in their religion as they are, but I'm interested in evaluating arguments, not in emotion. I enjoy arguing about ideas, and this is a fun topic involving a wide range of them, including some so bizarre to me that I've heard them 1,000 times and still get that weird tickle under my hat. I do not believe in, worship, or otherwise follow Satan, although sometimes I can't resist giving Christians a playful flick on the nose with jokes implying otherwise. I am not my own God, and I don't worship myself. Other things which are not gods include chance, evolution, science, money, sex, power, and literally everything else, and I don't worship any of them. Worship, like sin, is a predominantly religious concept and alien to me. It's not just absent from my life, there's no place in my life where I can see it being able to fit. The thought of seriously engaging in such an act would never organically occur to me. It only comes up in discussions about religion, and I'm still unclear on what value people find in this activity. I don't lack belief because I just want to sin. Aside from arguing on the internet occasionally, my life is not significantly different from that of the average Christian. Participating in all the sinful behaviors Christians usually insist I'm trying to free myself up for sounds exhausting, not appealing. Were that not the case, and I wanted to do all the naughty business Christians assume I do, this claim still makes no sense. If my unbelief were motivated by a desire to avert God's punishment for my sins, that would mean I already believe in God, which I don't. It would also require that sin and its punishment were concepts that I understood and believed in from the start of my non-belief. Sin, though, is a purely religious concept, which I only gained significant awareness of when I started paying attention to Christian claims in my mid-20s. Some Christians try to resolve this by claiming that everyone must already believe what they believe, contrary to my direct, non-sensory mental experience, which means that I have evidence of the highest possible quality showing me personally that at least some Christians are wrong about at least one of their absolutely certain beliefs. This does not help me take them as authoritative when they claim absolute certainty in other areas. If they were correct, and I knew God existed and feared his wrath, pretending not to believe would be a terrible strategy, since that could never fool the all-knowing judge. It gets worse when the punishment is not for sin, but for a lack of faith. Many Christians believe faith is the only factor determining whether you're admitted into heaven, yet insist that you are in fact punished for your sins, not your lack of faith. That's not possible, since that would require that all who have sinned go to hell and all who haven't go to heaven. There is no such clear division. The only clear division is that all with faith go to heaven and all without go to hell. Therefore, all protestations aside, what you are in fact punished for is your lack of faith, not your sins. The sins you've committed don't themselves matter much if you have strong faith. If I secretly believed the faith-alone Christians, yet for some reason desperately wanted to sin, the correct strategy would be to profess more faith than I actually have, and then sin as I please. That would be more consistent with the belief, although still extremely stupid, since I would have to forget God's omniscience. In short, my experience with religion has been mixed, but much of it has involved being misrepresented either out of ignorance or for cynical apologetic purposes. And now we move on to question 2. What compels you to reject Christianity entirely? Entirely is a strong word. As with many religions, there are some claims within Christianity with a factual basis. I think many of the stories in both the Old and New Testaments are likely based in truth, obscured with layers of exaggeration. The biblical Jesus probably has roots in a real historical figure, although I think a lot of the stories about him are heavily embellished or fictional. All we can actually say I reject entirely are the supernatural claims. This does not mean that I accept that they're false, although I do, but that's a separate issue. Here I just mean that I reject that they are likely true. There's a considerable difference between the statements, "I'm convinced Jesus did not rise from the dead," and "I'm not convinced Jesus rose from the dead." I agree with both, but I'll confine this discussion to the latter because it's by far the more important. I find your usage of the word compels to be apt. In my opinion, there is a sort of compulsion in belief. Belief, or lack thereof, is influenced by the basic nature of our brains, which we do not control, and all input which we ever receive, which in large part we also do not control. Anyone's mind can receive input which, whether desired or not, will change that mind's evaluation of a claim, and lead it towards or away from some new conclusion. Conversely, with a lack of sufficient input, the mind will not deviate from a currently held position. Without input sufficient to convince me of Christianity, I am compelled to reject Christian claims as not seeming likely true. We could refer to this required level of sufficiency as my standard of evidence, which acts as a mental filter. This is defined consciously to an extent, and is also partially innate and partially unconsciously learned. By partially innate, I mean that human minds have some ways of thinking which seem to come more naturally than others, and also that any standard defining what types of beliefs or justifications one is willing to accept will be based on preferences that instinct and emotion played some role in developing. Nobody's able to completely remove the emotional component from the formation of opinions, but with effort, its role can be mitigated. I have an emotional attachment to the concept of truth, which makes it uncomfortable when I discover I was wrong, and also when I discover that someone else was wrong, and this emotional tendency plays a role in defining how I craft my standard. Other people might put more priority on how secure or hopeful their beliefs make them feel, for example, which can lead to the formation of standards with less focus on evidential support, but more focus on something else. My standard has been shaped over years through my experiences, readings, discussions, and so on, refining what my mind considers adequate to become convinced. It is itself a belief based on an idea which did not originate in a simple choice, and the standard's formation, although deliberate to an extent, was not a raw, uninfluenced choice. Every new opinion which added refinement to the standard had to itself surpass the standard as it existed before that point. Every element of the standard had to be vetted by some previous version of the standard, going all the way back to some primordial version founded only on my basic nature. Rejecting it would hardly be conceivable without replacement by a more compelling standard. If I decided tomorrow that I would like to believe Christianity's supernatural claims, I would have a difficult time achieving actual belief in them, because the filtration mechanism of that standard is not fully controlled by my conscious will. Even though intention played some role in defining my standard, the standard prevents me from believing whatever I want. I am, in a way, compelled to reject whatever fails the test. Even if I'd never deliberately considered my standard of evidence, some claims would still fall short according to whichever standard had been formed automatically from experience and be rejected. In my attempts to avoid false or unfounded beliefs, I actively consider the nature of evidence. I try to exercise care in understanding the facts and arguments presented in support of any important claim, although, of course, with imperfect rates of success. Although my standard is neither perfect nor entirely under control of the will, I do what I can to keep that standard high in the hope that if the support for a claim exceeds it, my overall mental picture of the world improves as a representation of reality. If a claim is worthy of belief, then the works in support of it, produced by its proponents, should exceed my standard with relative ease. When my standard is overcome, my mind will change as I realize a new truth. This has happened many times, resulting in the addition of beliefs which I did not originally find plausible, but which new evidence forced me to accept. Christianity alleges that an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, and all-loving God is trying to reach me to initiate a personal relationship. If that's the case, the proponents of this belief should have little work to do. God himself knows exactly what will convince me and what will not. Since he strongly desires this relationship and knows that I am unaware of that, he will present what is needed to convince me, or at least inspire a Christian follower to present it on his behalf. Christian apologists attempt to address this, but in my opinion, they all fail. To me, this situation makes Christianity seem unbelievable and probably false. Christianity is not alone in experiencing my rejection. Like all religious people, Christians see their own religion as obviously special, and thus tend to assume others also see it as elevated above other beliefs. Although Christianity has more historical relevance to my culture than many other ideas, to me, it's still just one belief among many in the category of things I don't believe are true. It also falls into the smaller category of things I believe are untrue. Although this distinction is important in science, where falsification is the focus, it rarely has much importance in religious discussions where the focus is usually on attempts to verify God through undeniable arguments. While there's technically a difference between not believing Christianity and believing it's untrue, they're usually the same in effect, and so I find the untrue claim uninteresting. Most possible claims about anything fall into the category of things I don't think are true. For any given claim, this is not necessarily because I find it far-fetched. Many plausible claims fall into the same category. Take, for instance, a claim that a politician did something foolish. While not an extraordinary type of claim in the least, I wouldn't accept a new instance of it without evidence to establish its truth. What seems like a lack of evidence does not mean that there is no evidence. It means that I'm not aware of the existence of evidence which I can understand, and upon which can be built a valid, sound argument which I also understand. If any of these elements are missing, the evidence, the understanding, or the argument, it's very difficult to see the claim as reaching the level of likely true. I understand most Christian claims, and when I consider the internal consistency, logical consequences, alignment to reality, and evidential support of those claims, I consistently find them at best lacking, or worse, incoherent or self-contradictory. The consistent failure of the apparently best evidence and arguments to rise to what I consider to be a basic level of support, combined with the strong emotion associated with the religion and the fact that since AD 33 its beliefs have evolved through historical happenstance, make it look from outside like a typical man-made religion, not standing out in any remarkable way from the rest, despite apologists' attempts to establish Christianity as unique and exceptional. These factors, along with more fundamental arguments about the contradictions within the proposed nature of God and so on, push the supernatural claims of Christianity into the stronger category of things I believe are untrue. I want to clarify this by stating several things this does not mean. It does not mean I'm certain that it's untrue. Certainty, in my view, is not applicable. I rarely use this word. When I do, it tends to be in a discussion of certainty itself, or in the colloquial sense, which does not literally mean certainty, but instead just very high confidence. With regard to Christianity's supernatural claims, I would describe my belief in their untruth as pretty confident. It does not mean I refuse to believe that it's true. I don't think beliefs are accepted, refused, or chosen simply at will. I think that someone is or is not convinced to some adequate degree of confidence by a claim getting past the standard enforced by the brain, regardless of will. It does not mean I believe but refuse to acknowledge that it's true. This is a common accusation, which is easily refuted for me internally, but not for any external person, since that would require giving evidence of my internal mental state, which is inherently difficult. This claim seems to stem from a failure to recognize genuine differences in processes of thought, resulting in a false assumption that everyone must think in roughly the same way, which leads to frustrating misunderstandings. While I reject Christianity's supernatural claims in their entirety and consider them likely false, I do not entirely deny the possibility that they're true. I believe that feeling absolute certainty in my beliefs would risk closing me off to truths which I, in my lack of omniscience, have not yet grasped. In my opinion, this is a major reason why religions place such importance upon absolute certainty. It's easier to maintain unquestioning belief when the doors of the mind are closed. I want no part of that, because it would create a major problem for the pursuit of truth. I do not understand everything, I will not understand everything, and I'm careful to remember that. Humility of this kind is not an empty gesture, but essential if one is to remain open to learning. Acknowledgement of one's limitations is key to overcoming them. It's rare to find a kill-shot argument that definitively destroys an entire complex of ideas like Christianity. Pithy arguments about the internal consistency of God can sometimes be effective, but fixating on things like that as the main reasons to believe or disbelieve something can distract us from the more important issues surrounding our standards for justification and acceptance of beliefs. Alright, question number 3. What makes the evidence of Christianity specifically not believable to you? That's a big question, and therefore difficult to answer comprehensively without writing a number of books, or, as I've done, making hundreds of videos. I could spend the next 50 pages on a bullet-pointed list of the claimed evidence and my counter-arguments, but that's not a productive approach. In trying to rehash the entire Christian versus atheist debate, I would wind up pruning branches instead of dealing with the roots of the issue. As it looks to me, Christianity was never intended to be a conclusion resting on a supporting structure of evidence. Christian attempts to portray it as such only reinforce this view. It seems like the evidence is built upon the conclusion, to reinforce it from above. The conclusion itself seems to rest upon felt needs, and Christians are nearly always willing to speak candidly on how the true core of their belief is its emotional significance. The evidence, such as it is, seems to matter only to reinforce the faith already present, or to defend it from outsiders. It does not seem to be based on an honest search for understanding, and the evidence's actual level of quality does not seem like an important consideration in most cases. High-quality evidence would display features such as reliability, relevance, and coherence. If we consider rationalistic arguments to be a subcategory of evidence, as Christian apologists usually do, then these would need to be valid, internally consistent, and soundly based on accurate information. Fallacious reasoning is rightfully frowned upon since it leads to unrealistic results, but it's casually accepted in mainstream Christian apologetics. Curiously, this is not the consistent behavior of most Christians, who quickly identify and avoid fallacies in nearly all areas of life, then suddenly, and seemingly without awareness, embrace it when a discussion approaches the one subject set aside as special. The Christian explanation of both its own and external evidence lacks falsifiability, parsimony, and predictive and explanatory utility. It's a haphazard set of constructs meant to support the unstable conclusion at their base, but which in my opinion only destabilize it further. I think that Christianity would be healthier and more future-proof if supported by firm appeals to faith, feeling, and some deeper mysticism, rather than by disguising Christian thought as secular by mimicking modern science. I don't see how Christians can believe that Christianity's prospects of thriving long-term have been helped by posing it as a competing, evidence-based hypothesis. The average Christian apologist seems to believe that clever arguments, wordplay, or selective reinterpretations of disjointed fragments of human knowledge should be all that are needed to establish the overall truth of the worldview to any outsider. These arguments usually fail immediately upon examination of their consistency with themselves, or slightly later when considering their consistency with either reality or the broader theological framework of the religion. More sophisticated arguments, or those written in obscurantist language, can take longer to pull apart, but it happens nevertheless. The evidence presented seems fragmentary and incoherent, failing to produce a compelling web of mutual corroboration. Arguments that may seem compelling in isolation cannot change this, and I see Christianity as lacking even those. Once they're understood, all the arguments I'm familiar with, including those regarded as exceptionally strong by serious and intelligent Christian thinkers, either crumble to dust or are revealed as the argumentative equivalent of a forced rhyme, approaching the intended result but not quite succeeding. The top-tier arguments are not representative of those most commonly heard from average apologists, including famous ones such as Frank Turek, whose arguments display little serious contemplation of what they truly say, mean, or imply, or even in which contexts they apply. This observation, of course, does nothing to undermine the evidence itself, since the quality of the evidence overall does not depend on the quality of any apologist's work. But it's worth mentioning and contemplating because it makes it more difficult for newcomers to take Christianity seriously. Question 4. If Christianity were absolutely true, would you follow Jesus? Christians claim that Christianity already is true, here and now. If it were absolutely true, it would have to be. In that case, the universe would apparently still look as it does, and here and now, in the universe as it is, I don't follow Jesus. So the only non-contradictory answer is no. However, your question raises two others with more interesting answers. If I came to believe in the truth of Christianity, would I follow Jesus? And could I know it to be true with absolute certainty? If I began to believe in the truth of an omniscient, omnipotent God, and an eternal fiery hell for those who do not follow Jesus, but I retained my current perspective on the implications of hell, and thus did not believe God was loving or benevolent, the answer to the first question is simple. I would follow to the very best of my ability, to the point of obsession, ignoring all other aspects of life. Perhaps I would give up eating to spend more time praying, with the infinitely cruel stakes elevated from just another fantastical religious threat to a sincere belief about reality. There could be no playing tough. In the face of an all-powerful mass torturer looking to inflict infinite and maximally painful punishment upon me and billions of others for a state of mind that caused no harm to it or anyone, from whom there is no hiding even in my thoughts, resistance has no place. There is no conceivable path to victory, only total defeat. I would endure the hell of mental self-annihilation for decades, if necessary, to avoid eternity in the other hell. If I believed in God, hell, and the Christian story, and God wiped away my recognition of his hatefulness and replaced it with a naive belief that despite his actions he is all-loving and omnibenevolent, then God's helpful cerebral sanitization would let me follow Jesus willingly, and I would be a standard Christian. If I came to believe in God and Christianity, but like some Christians did not believe in hell, and I believed God wanted the best for me, there would be space for me to act according to my sincere ways of thought. I would be a believer, but an unconventional one, acting with genuine freedom of thought. In retaining my autonomy, I would probably end up similar to how I am now, with a few extra beliefs. Without being in this situation, it's hard to say if I would follow Jesus, but I'm not much of a follower. If this were the true state of things, God wouldn't mind either way, or at least wouldn't cook me alive if he did mind. The second question is more philosophical and not as simple. Can absolute certainty realistically be achieved on this question or any other in a deeper sense than just feeling it? My answer is that if it can, I can't see how. Everyone has the experience of being wrong. We've all made errors in thinking, some of which we discovered later, some of which we did not. This is not a matter of intelligence or diligence. The smartest person in the world can practice extreme dedication to avoiding error and yet be wrong about something. The recognition of this weakness is the basis of the scientific method, which attempts to compensate for the fallibility of man. As such, no matter how much evidence I believe I have for any claim, or how compelling I find it to be, I cannot claim certainty on that basis because I recognize my capacity for misinterpretation. Something can be obviously true to me, but not to all. And while I must ultimately rely on my own mind to form my understanding, I don't see myself as having justification to engage in the self-deifying hubris required to proclaim that my mind, and the information it possesses, is objectively superior to all others. A common and puerile way of dismissing atheist objections is to claim that in a naturalistic universe, humans could not rely on our brains to reach perfectly reliable conclusions about reality, and therefore naturalist atheists should find our reasoning questionable and stop having opinions altogether. This insinuation that atheists might not be justified in regarding ourselves as infallible is apparently considered hilarious. This is a colossal failure on the Christian's part. It's correct that I don't see myself as infallible, but the non-theistic, naturalistic basis of the world has nothing to do with why. The problem is far deeper, and it applies to Christianity as well. Infallible belief is only possible with omniscience, and humans are not omniscient. Christians believe their worldview solves human fallibility by asserting that human reasoning was created by God so that we may understand his creation, with the added perk that we can access the mind of God through scripture or prayer. We may believe on faith that these grant us access to God, and feel certain on that basis, but we still lack the total knowledge needed to guarantee that there are no other possibilities. Christianity itself, with its vast array of disagreements and varieties, and its inability to agree on basic truths about religion, God, and the world, puts the lie to the claim that Christianity solves fallibility. Their divinely created infallible reasoning and scripture leave Christians no better able to achieve perfect knowledge than anyone else. The fall is sometimes presented as an excuse for this, which acknowledges the point that human reasoning is flawed. If God has complete infallible knowledge, humans still do not. No matter how strong our belief, no matter how often we speak with him or engage with his word, regardless of the fundamental basis of our minds in the natural or supernatural, our minds are all similarly human, with the same biases and susceptibility to fallacious thinking and inaccurate perceptions, and we're all limited to relying upon our fallible selves in the formation of our beliefs. As such, if I were a Christian, I would be no more justified than I am now in declaring absolute certainty in any belief, including a belief in Jesus. Doing so would position myself and all humans as equal to God, which as a Christian I would consider blasphemous. Alright, so far so good. I like these questions so far. Just kind of nailing down the basics, which is important. That's where we gotta start. Come back for part 2, where I'll wrap this up. Thank you for being here, and if you would, before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, maybe consider supporting. A few bucks a month is enormously helpful, and huge thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. Early access, email list, list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.